Hello and welcome everybody that's watching. Today we're going to have some really important topics. As creatives, and most of our space and time readers are creative people, we tend to gloss over the legal portions, the tax portions, all the kind of really scary parts of being a horror writer or speculative fiction writer. So today we have two experts with us. We have Chris Brown from Pixel Law, and we have Meghan Hovee, which I'm actually going to ask her if that's how to pronounce her name. I meant to ask that. But from Hovee CPA, it would be good if I could talk. And they're here today to take questions from the audience. All your questions about taxes and CPA stuff and lawyering stuff, that's what they're here for. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little introduction of them. Chris Brown works for Pixel Law, or owns Pixel Law. He made his entrepreneurial jump in 2013. He resigned from a mid-sized Kansas City law firm and became a full-time entrepreneur. In the years since, he's created and sold a legal marketing company, mass-produced his family's barbecue sauce, which I want to try, mentored thousands of entrepreneurs and freelancers, and more. He's currently representing entrepreneurs in Kansas and Missouri, and I have heard a rumor that possibly very soon Colorado, through Pixel Law, and building Contract Canvas, a digital contract platform for creative professionals. So he is the guy that we need to talk about for all our legal stuff. And Meghan Hovee she started her career at a big four accounting firm, but it didn't take her long to realize that her greatest passion was in serving the financial interests of individuals, everyday people, and small businesses. That's us. It has always been and always will be her mission to teach and empower her clients. Successful business is the result of serving others with integrity and genuine care. And just as a little disclaimer, Space and Time has used both of these these professionals for our own business needs. So we recommend them. But let's go ahead and hear from Chris Brown. He's going to introduce himself, and then we will hear from Meghan, and then the Q&A will start. Wait, hold on just a moment. You're muted.
I'm sorry. I use Zoom all the time, and I'm so accustomed to Zoom, but I'm screwing this up. So anyway, thank you for having me. When she was giving that intro there, it reminded me that I just finished reading Dracula yesterday. I read a lot of books, but mostly like business books, biographies, and things. I don't read a lot of a lot of fiction books, but I thought Dracula was an awesome book. I thought maybe that was relevant here. Okay, so thanks for the intro. Like she said, I'm a lawyer. I represent startups and freelancers, a lot of creative people. So all kinds of graphic artists, illustrators. I represent some publishers and some writers. And so what I'm going to do is give you just a 4 or 5 minute intro to some legal topics that are really important for writers and especially freelance writers. And then of course, we'll dive in deeper as we get into the Q&A. So the two topics I'm going to cover are forming a business and intellectual property. So when it comes to forming a business, the absolute easiest way to run your business actually is just to operate a sole proprietorship. What that means is that you are the owner of the business. You don't actually have a business entity, although you are operating a business. And when you're a sole proprietor, it's pretty simple. You simply sell your goods, write your content, provide your services, collect money under your own name. You might have a DBA, and maybe it's on file with the state, but basically it's just you. At the end of the year, you report taxes on your personal income tax return that Meghan can talk a little bit more about, but it's pretty simple. But you also have the option of forming a business entity, and there are a lot of business entity options. But for the most part, I presume most of you would end up creating an LLC if you want to create one. There's a lot of benefits to creating an LLC. You can have co-owners of the business. It makes it a little bit easier to sell. In certain situations, it makes it easier for your clients to call you a contractor and not an employee. I mean, there's just various reasons why you should do it. The biggest reason being, if you have anyone else working on your behalf for your clients, then an LLC can be very helpful because it can help you limit your liability. I mean, that's the name, right? Limited liability company. So if you have anybody else working for you on your behalf, or if you have a lot of risks out there like commercial lease agreements or anything, forming an LLC is extremely beneficial. It's actually really easy. I don't know if everybody in this room is more so in Kansas and Missouri, or if maybe they're all over the place, but most states make it pretty easy. Kansas, for example, charges $166. Missouri is $50. Once you file in Missouri, you don't have to file anything else ongoing, but Kansas does require annual reports. But point is, it's not that hard to keep it going. You do this by by filing articles of organization with the Secretary of State. For the most part, you can do this online. It's like a 1-page, 2-page document, and that's really about it. Once the business is up and running, it's important to keep it separate from you, the individual, the owner. And you do that by doing things like creating a bank account for the business and using that for all of the business transactions. Signing contracts under your own name. Maybe getting insurance, depending on the type of service or goods that you're selling. But that's it. I highly recommend LLCs for most freelancers, especially if you're doing it full time or even doing it part time. If you're only doing 1 or 2 projects a year, it may not be worth it. But anybody who's doing it in a professional capacity, I think it makes sense. So that's forming a business in a very quick nutshell. Intellectual property is the other area that we can talk through. And to be clear, when you're doing Q&A, feel free to ask me anything about legal issues. But the other area is intellectual property. So you've got patents, which protect primarily inventions, which probably doesn't matter too much to most of you. Trade secrets that will protect confidential info, which might matter to you. And if so, you can use non-disclosure agreements to protect your information or your client's info. Trademarks will protect your branding elements. So these are things like your name, logo, tagline, product names, and so on. And then copyrights. And copyrights is probably the most important area of IP for all of you. So I'm going to touch on a couple quick points on copyrights. First, well, actually, really the biggest thing you need to know is who owns the copyright. Once you get a copyright in a creative work, so this is everything from movies to books to dance choreography, computer code, business plans, presentations, even this presentation today, in theory, could be copywritten. So once you get the copyright, it's important to know who owns it. And if you're an employee and you're creating content or other creative works for your employer, then your employer probably owns the copyright just by nature of that relationship. Outside of that employment relationship, so independent contractors, for example, that's not true. In fact, independent contractors will own the copyright in all of their creative works unless they assign it to their client in writing. And that can be in the form of a client agreement, or it could be a copyright assignment document. It can be a lot of different forms, but unless it's in writing, then the independent contractor will own the copyright. And that's a really big deal. And for most freelancers and freelance writers, it's a huge deal, because unless you give it to your client in writing, you own it, which means you can charge more money for it. You can prevent your client from reusing it and all kinds of other things. The last point on copyright is whether or not you should register it. As soon as you create an original work of authorship, and as soon as you do it in a tangible form, so you're typing it into a computer, writing it down, whatever, you actually own the copyright right then and there. You don't have to register it with the government. With that said, there are benefits to registration. I'm not going to necessarily go through those right now, but I'll just say that if your core business is selling creative works that are easy to copy, so books, short stories, movies, music, whatever, it's easy to copy and easy for people to steal, then registering your copyright's a really good idea. It's like $45. You can do it on the Copyright Office website. It's not very hard at all. You can do it yourself without a lawyer, and I recommend you do it. If copyrights and the creative assets are kind of secondary to your business, you may not need to copyright them. Like I give away a lot of ebooks on legal issues, and I haven't even bothered registering those because I don't sell ebooks. Ebooks are a part of my marketing collateral. So they're important to me, but that's not my main asset. So I haven't even registered mine. But anyway, if what you're selling is creative in nature and a copyright is a huge deal, I'd recommend registering it. So those are the 2 things I was going to go through. I'll let Megan kind of take it away on some of the tax stuff, and then feel free to come back to me on whatever questions you might have. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I actually have questions now myself from listening to your, so I jotted those down. We're going to come back to you in just a minute. We'll have you and Megan up to do a conversation, but let's go ahead and get Megan up now. And welcome, Megan. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Angela. If I do get glitchy or anything, just holler at me. Let me know. It's a pleasure, Angela. I could not enjoy your sense of humor more. And Chris is an attorney I respect more than any other attorney. So it's really fun to be here today with both of you guys. I'm just going to I'll give you a quick background. What we do, we like to think it's unique. We are experts in tax and accounting in my office, and our whole goal is really to teach our clients more and never see them again. So if you feel disgruntled in your accounting or your taxes, it might be because my industry does struggle, I think, to provide really good service that involves really the person. So we're kind of on a mission to revolutionize that over time. But I'm going to run through some just true or false. I think that tends to help it stick in people's minds when it comes to like tax and accounting. Just a few bullets here. True or false, I should be saving for taxes in my business on a regular basis. And that answer is generally no, you're okay, because you don't have any net income to pay taxes on. However, you are making kind of money if what you're bringing in is, and that's where we do, we offer services to kind of help teach people about that and get them going. But if nothing else, talk to your tax accountant and just get an idea of how much. I tell clients a really general range. It's very specific to your household income, but a general range is 25% to 30% of your net income. So after expenses, putting that aside and you pay that out quarterly is how often they'd like it. So I know that opens up a whole can of worms, but in general, should I be saving for taxes? Yes, you should. If you're running a business yourself or you're freelancing and no one else is taking taxes out, you'd have no W-2, you should be saving for your tax return. So that's a true or false. That's probably the most common I get, honestly, when people are just getting started. True or false, I just have the IRS to worry about as it relates to question 1. That would be false. So you always want to be aware that your federal government wants some tax money from you. So does your state, and typically a lot of times your locality, so your city, especially if you're in a city, like if you're in Kansas City or if you're in Chicago or if you're in Seattle. I mean, if you're in like a real a more populated city, a lot of times that's where you get your business license if needed. But there's also a lot of times local taxes that you may not have in a smaller, maybe more rural area. But it's just something to be keep in mind. So as you're getting started, take a look at what you need to do federally and then in your state and then also in your town. And then true or false, I should wait to get accounting software until I've got a lot of money coming in. I would say that's generally false, just because accounting software these days is getting so slick and inexpensive. I mean, you can get something like, I do predominantly use QuickBooks with my clients, but you can get something like Wave or FreshBooks, and they try to make it very user-friendly for non-accountants. And the pricing, I mean, I've seen these to be, I've seen them free, honestly. There's some products out there that they will, accounting products you can use and you don't pay for, but even as inexpensive as like $5 a month. So there's apps to make your life easier when it comes to your accounting. I do get the question a lot, what am I supposed to do with the business bank account? And in the tax world, when you're an LLC, from a tax perspective, the IRS is just worried about you paying taxes on your net income. They're not the ones overseeing your bank accounts and making sure your business and your personal isn't commingled. Quite frankly, if you can substantiate your expenses, they're not too worried about that. It's the LLC and Chris's area that's like, you need those transactions to be separated if you have an LLC. Otherwise, you've started to commingle, and Chris can correct me, but it's not protecting, your LLC isn't protecting you as it would if you keep your transactions separate. So all that to say, you get your business bank account set up like Chris recommended. And then if you get an easy accounting app to connect it to that bank account, pretty soon you're just swiping. Oh, that was income. Oh, that's an office supply expense. Oh, that's meals and entertainment to meet with a prospective client. And you've got a real financial statements, and your effort was pretty minimal there. So as a tax preparer, I like to tell people, go ahead and look and see if you can get an accounting software that's in your budget, because I think you can, and it makes everyone's lives easier. At the end of the day, if you track it in an Excel spreadsheet or something, great, but do track your income and your expenses. If nothing else, it's going to help you kind of feel empowered in your business, I think. And then my last one, true or false, I should rely on Freelance and writing threads and forums as my final source of truth for tax and accounting advice. And my answer there is false. And the reason I bring this one up is because it is kind of comical sometimes, the stuff that comes in, like my clients come in with. that it's just so far off the truth of like what the IRS allows and expects. And so I do think as a professional, I would go to my community's, Facebook or blog and ask them, hey, what do you all do for a good attorney around town? Or what do you all do to organize your employee holiday party? I would go and ask them, but I wouldn't rely on that as like my final source of truth if it involved, taxes or legal. And the reason I had a string of inquiries where several clients came in and said, hey, I think I need to establish my farm as a business because then I can write off all my like land expenses every year. And they really were seeing this on threads and forums. And if you take an expense on any kind of business for a significant period of time, the IRS will reclassify that as a hobby and you will owe them a lot of tax dollars back. So it's stuff like that you just see a lot of this, people telling each other, this is what I do. And then that the information relies and trusts that, and that can be harmful. So I would just say, if you hear something that sounds too good to be true as it relates to paying taxes, ask your accountant, ask a tax professional, because it might be too good to be true. It might be that someone's getting away with something that they shouldn't. So, I go vacation in Hawaii every year and I write it off as a business expense. And maybe there's really no business happening. And they say, that's something my accountant says I can do that. Don't just run with that piece of information. Go ahead and bounce it off your own professional. Those are kind of my 4 bullets. One other thing I just like to throw out there is I know the tax and the legal side of things, but especially the tax and accounting can be overwhelming. And sometimes I think people kind of put their head in the sand because it feels like I'll never understand it. You can find professionals like myself who will teach and hold your hand through it all, but also know that you're not in business if you don't get some kind of notice from your city or your state that you missed this or that filing. My best clients will get a notice once in a while because there's a lot to comply with, a lot to do. It's one step at a time. It's not going to do your business in if you miss this or that. Like the whole goal is to get as organized as you can so that your peace of mind is there. But just know that nothing is the end of the world as it relates to taxes and accounting. I tell clients all the time, it's one step at a time. So that's what I've got, and look forward to any questions you might have for Chris or myself. I've taken notes, Chris, on your presentation. I really enjoy learning from you. So thank you. And thank you, Angela.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get both of you back up here. We have some questions, so I'm going to go ahead and get you with those. Thank you, both of you, by the way. I've actually added to the questions listening to both your presentations. I was like, oh, but wait, what about this? So let's go ahead and get started with some of those. I have for Meghan, what is the difference between a business account and a personal account?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I touched on, but really one is in the business's name and one is in your personal name. And so as Chris mentioned, when you're a sole proprietor, that is one and the same. They can come out, you can have one account that you're running your business out of, but it's got your name on it, and he will correct me if I'm wrong. But otherwise, your business account is like your LLC's account, and you want business expenses and business income going in and out of that. And your personal is your personal. So I do see freelancers a lot of times that have them all combined. And again, that's okay until you've got that LLC set up. But the minute you've got an LLC, you really need to distinguish between the two. So the differences you'll see is business transactions in one, personal on the other. And then I'll let Chris add anything because I think he might have a comment there.
Yeah, that's generally right from the legal side. When I say keep everything separate, the reason we say that is because when you have an LLC, you get that limited liability that I was talking about. Courts can pierce that, though. It's called piercing the corporate veil, and they can go after the owners of the business. They generally only do that if you're committing fraud, like you're intentionally trying to, scam people. They can go for other reasons too, but that's the big reason. But if you start commingling your assets together, your personal assets and your business assets, commingle your money and so on, that's one factor, not the sole factor, just one factor that a court will look at. So if you do commingle your money, it's not like you're necessarily going to be attacked by a court. It's just not the best thing to do.
Yes, and this is the moment where space and time is saying, do as they say, not as we do. But we're working on that. We're getting it organized. I have a question for you, Chris, which is, and you touched upon this a little bit, but it's one of the questions that somebody asked. So I'm going to go ahead and see if you have anything to add to it, but it is basically why to incorporate. Like, what's the benefits?
Yeah, and so I mentioned you can form an LLC. You can also form a corporation. You can also form a partnership or a nonprofit. There's just a lot of different options there. The biggest benefit really is the limited liability that you get that I was mentioning earlier. And so, just if you have people working for you, that's really one of the biggest ones. So let's say that you're a writer and you have people that are ghostwriting for you and helping you out, and so one of them commits copyright infringement and you get sued because of that. You're going to be personally liable for that lawsuit if it's just you under your name, right? And that's really not good. If you have an LLC, you can shield yourself from that liability and say, my LLC is liable, sue that all you want, get a judgment, whatever, but you're not necessarily personally liable unless you individually committed the wrongful act. So I like to use the example of a pizza delivery company. If you own a pizza company and you've got people driving pizzas around town and one of them gets into a car accident, right? Well, let's say that you're the one driving. So you're driving the pizza around town because it's a sole proprietorship and you get in an accident, you're liable for everything. If it's a delivery person working on your behalf, the delivery person's probably liable. They're the one who was steering the wheel. The pizza company itself is liable because they employed that person. But you, the business owner, are not necessarily liable for what happened on the road because you weren't driving the car. It was your company and the employee. So that's where the limited liability comes in. It's not always helpful. If you write 4 articles a year for a local magazine, your risk is pretty minimal, right? But as you move up the chain and do more and more work and have people working for you, that liability starts to increase.
Awesome. We have a question in chat from Sweet Nuri. She says, do you need an LLC before you start selling stuff online, or can you do it later after you start earning money? And I guess that's probably to both of you. That's for Chris for the LLC, but also an accounting question.
Let me tackle the first part because it's easy. No, you don't. You can operate as a sole proprietorship. I do think, again, if you're only doing it once every quarter, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe you wait until you get the monthly gig or the weekly gig before you incorporate. But I do like the idea of incorporating earlier rather than later because I think it's just a little bit cleaner overall. But no, you don't have to. So Megan, what are your thoughts on the finance side?
Yeah, that's 100% what I would have said is, doing it earlier is cleaner, but you haven't done anything wrong and you're not in trouble if you haven't done it yet. Anytime you feel that it's necessary, go ahead. And I have a lot of clients. It's kind of interesting that they think that their business starts when, like, my business starts once I have an LLC. My business starts once I, have an office or something. But really, anytime you have a product or service you're selling, and especially once people have interest and you have some demand, you've started a business in the eyes of the IRS and otherwise. So the LLC just serves you in that legal and that liability protection sense. But your business has already started if you're selling something. So.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So if a writer came to me in November and said they're thinking about forming a company, and so they were a solo at first, right? Sole proprietorship. I would often say, you know what? Yes, but wait until January 1st. Finish out the year under your sole proprietorship so you can file taxes that way. January 1st, do the LLC so that you don't have to split the year. Would you agree with that, Megan?
Great question. No, but and that's not bad advice. And this is something that we talk about a lot, that it just goes back to that disregarded. And I think this is a really interesting fact I like to remind people of. In the eyes of the IRS, the LLC is disregarded, and Chris knows this, but it's fun to explain it to people. Like, these things don't operate on the same playing field. So an LLC is there for your state legal protection, but the IRS doesn't care about it at all. It doesn't see it as a different entity just because you formed an LLC. So they honestly don't care if your EIN goes on your personal tax return. So your Schedule C on your personal return, they're not worried about your EIN. They're not worried about the word LLC or not. As far as they are concerned, you're still that sole proprietor Chris talked about. So you're still operating as a sole proprietor. And then, and if and until, and this gets into another topic, but if you're doing such good revenues that you really are starting to see net income that supports your salary plus maybe some business profit, so just quite a bit of net income, you look at a different taxation. So really, for most people's kind of starting out, I would say go ahead and get the LLC now, but it's a really good question. And if you're getting really technical, it'd be more clean to wait, but the IRS isn't worried about seeing 2 Schedule Cs. So, yeah. So
can I ask, I think you just answered my question. So you would do 2 Schedule Cs if they formed in November. You would do one for the first 10 months and one for the last 2 months?
I wouldn't
Oh, you wouldn't.
yeah, same operation, but it's like if someone just was really dotting their I's and crossing their T's, they could.
Yeah.
But it's the same. If it's the same operation and really fundamentally the substance of the business is the same, then I would do one. So that's why I'd say don't worry about waiting. But yeah,
okay.
good question.
Okay, I'll stop asking the deep questions.
Yeah.
No, it's good, because I actually have a follow-up question now. You touched upon it a little bit, and this is for you, Meghan. What is the difference between, you said hobby and, where's the line for that? And I don't know if you said it and I just didn't catch it, but what's the difference between being a hobbyist and a professional?
Such a loaded question with the tax reform we had a few years ago. I would say,
you can always plead the fifth and say, I will answer that to you when you make an appointment with me.
No. It's really good. It's really good. Here's what I would say, given the tax reform, tax reform was supposed to help everyone, especially people in business. But one thing it did is it made it that if you have a hobby where you're making money, you want to go ahead and call that a business right now, because you have to report all the income, and you don't get to take a loss on it. So generally speaking, right now, if you have an activity that is making you money, netting you positive, you want to call that a business. Because of the latest IRS rules. But basically, if you take a loss on something consistently, time over time, like a sewing activity or a yoga training activity, that is a hobby. The IRS will call it a hobby after a couple of years. So if you are like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and add this activity on my return because I have a lot of expenses and it can reduce my taxable income. No, don't do it. That's a hobby. And later on, they're going to come back and say, you owe us tax because you can't ride off your bicycling club that you lose money on every year. So that's the difference. A hobby is something that loses you money. A business is something that makes you money, if you want to get real bottom line.
Okay. Yeah, I actually like that. So technically, I'm a hobbyist.
A few of us. Yes. That's what it works.
I have a question for Chris. It says, when you talked about registering copyrights for $45, what did you mean?
So go to the copyright website. I think it's just copyright.gov. And to be clear, there's a lot of different types of fees. So that's not like everything's 45, and it could be $5, give or take. I can't remember. But you go to the website and you basically click register a work, and you can go through and you basically upload a copy of the work. So if you're a writer, you would just upload like a PDF of your script or your story. Type in your name and address information like that, type in the date that you created the work and so on. And then you click submit. I think that's literally all there is to it. It's not very complicated and it's pretty inexpensive. They are backed up right now. I think they're taking like 4 or 5 months to reply. I don't remember exactly. But the benefit of the Copyright Office in comparison to the Trademark Office is that the Copyright Office is not going to do any searching. They're going to pretty much just file stamp it unless there's something wrong with your application. Conversely, trademarks is much more complicated. The filing fee is more expensive. Trademark searches are really important because the Trademark Office will actually do a search and so on. But anyway, on the copyright side, it's really easy, relatively cheap. And there's different ways you can file a copyright. You can do a collective work. And that, like, if you do a collective work, you might be able to do like 5 stories for one chunk, one price. And I can't remember if it's 45 or not, but you can reduce filing fees by doing that if you fit the right requirements.
Okay, awesome. I have a question for Meghan. And did I actually say your last name right? Hovee?
Yeah, Hovee. Yep, you got it.
Okay. All right, I have a question for Meghan Hovee. It is, I'm quoting this, although this is also reflective of myself. I don't math well. How can I keep records? Do you have suggestions?
Yes. I think if you don't math well, I think that's the best time to find one of these apps I'm talking about. Like, and these are the names. There are so many out there, but Wave, FreshBooks, Xero, and then QuickBooks, Simple Start, or Self-Employed. But that's kind of geared toward freelancers and inexpensive. But that's even more so when I get an app, because then you're not doing your math. Like, they are doing that math for you and you're just swiping. Ooh, that was income that came into my bank. Oh, that was an office supply that went out of my bank. And then it creates your financials for you. That would be a great, it's so competitive, the fees on that it's nominal.
Awesome.
And I'd like to reiterate what Meghan said earlier about once you get it up and running, it's as easy as swiping or clicking a button. So I reconcile my books every other Monday, and I set up bank rules in the accounting program. I use Xero, but QuickBooks, FreshBooks, I think they all do it. And you just click locate everything. And every now and then I'll come across a transaction like, well, that's weird. I don't know what that is. And I'll have to go dig and figure out what it is. But seriously, those platforms are well worth the money. And I think Meghan would love you if you used a platform instead of a shoebox of receipts.
Well, you couldn't overstate that.
Awesome. Well, I do have QuickBooks now. Now we just need to set it up.
And that's another thing. If you want to, like, if for someone's brain, it feels so messy to start before whatever date, go ahead and say, I'm going to start on like a next quarter. I'm going to start January 1. But if that's fine. Just do the receipts one more year and then start when it makes sense to you, but start. Yeah.
That's the bottom line, to start. Get organized. Learn. You don't have to math well. That's what apps are for. There's an app for that. All right. We have a couple questions coming in. We have a question about adapting a short story to film. How does one demonstrate due diligence in tracking down rights for an orphaned work? This is from Theodore Cormie.
Yeah, this is really complicated. By orphaned work, I presume what he's mentioning is a work that is no longer owned by copyright, or which the copyright owner has somehow tried to give up their copyright in, which legally I don't even think you can do. I actually wrote a 40-page law review article about Creative Commons and copylefts and so on. So that unless it's really old, like 100 years plus old, like 1800s old or older, I think you should make the assumption that somebody somewhere owns the copyright, right? Because anything created in the last 50, 60 years, for sure, somebody probably owns it. And then in that case, if it's kind of blurry, searching internet databases, searching the Copyright Office database. If there's anything music related, you can search in the Performing Rights Organization databases like ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. To try to find out if anybody owns it. That's probably about all I can say, other than, of course, talking to a lawyer. Lawyers can do some of this digging for you. And then what happens is, if somebody actually sues you for copyright infringement, well, first of all, they're more likely to send you a letter, right? They're more likely to contact you by mail or email or something before they sue you. Can't guarantee they will. They can sue you anytime. But if you get the letter, having that research that you've performed and a listing of all the places you searched would certainly help you at least prove some good faith effort, right? So maybe you can settle it a little bit easier. But in the end, if it's copyright infringement and they decide to sue you, then they're going to have a pretty good claim if they actually own the copyright. So for that reason, you might want some kind of media insurance policy to cover copyright claims. Just make sure whatever insurance you buy specifically covers copyright claims, because most insurance policies will exclude that unless you have it added on in like a media policy. So, okay. But wow, that's a complicated question.
Yeah, he says the work came out in 1928. So.
Oh, okay. See, I hate that year. Like right around like the 1920s and 30s is when it starts to get blurry as to who owns what. So Disney made a lot of stuff in the 30s and 40s, and Disney successfully lobbied Congress in the late 90s to extend copyright protection. And Mickey Mouse and a lot of stuff is coming up for expiration here pretty soon. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, that's a complicated time period. I'd have to go back and check my notes to see when the actual laws changed, because I can't remember, but somewhere around that time.
Yes, and I will say Disney, I would not mess with them. As a non-legal person, I would say don't mess with Disney.
Yeah, they enforce their rights. They're a content business. You know what I mean? Right or wrong, in terms of how they lobby Congress, they sell content. So they have to protect their works. And so do all of you. You can't let people steal your works. That doesn't work. Then you have a hobby. Anyway.
I have a question. I think this is probably for Meghan. It says, if I make less than $500 a year as a writer, do I need to claim it on my taxes? The money I earn is very inconsistent.
The IRS would say yes. There's rules about sending 1099s and things like that. But in general, the general practice to have is if you have any income, report it. If that's your plan, is to make that like little, or you're okay with that, you might be looking at, hey, I have a hobby that I just need to keep good records of because I do net a little bit. But that's probably a hobby if that's what's going to happen indefinitely. It's just a good practice, good habit to go ahead and report any net income. One interesting fact is, like if you babysit and you make $10 an hour, the IRS does want that reported. And actually, that's kind of a loaded statement because then you're probably into nanny tax that other people need to pay for you. But if you walk dogs, it doesn't matter. I just think, again, I think it's funny that people think, oh, if I get paid a certain way, I don't have to report taxes on it. Or no, they want, if someone or a business is making money, they want some taxes on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so like Disney, also don't mess with the IRS.
Yeah, also don't mess. Yeah.
In the comments, Theodore assures us it is not Disney that he's looking at. So good questions, everybody. I have another question that was sent in. I'm going to give this to Chris, and I think we've pretty much covered this. What is intellectual property is the question. I guess just the definition. Yeah.
Okay. So there's 4 types of IP: patents protect inventions primarily. Most of you probably don't need to worry too much about patents. Trade secrets protect confidential information. So if you're sharing financials or target client information, things like that, you can use a non-disclosure agreement to protect those trade secrets. There's also federal and state laws that protect trade secrets, but mainly it's non-disclosure agreements. Trademarks protect branding elements, so logos, trade names, slogans, product names, even scents and colors and things like that, and even sounds like the roar, the tiger in front of the movies, MGM, I think, that's a trademark. That sound is a trademark. And then copyright will protect creative works like music, dance, art, business plans, certainly writings and books and short stories. So those are the 4 main types of IP, and they are all very different from one another, and they're all protected using different means.
Awesome. And this is a terrible question for me to say, but we trademarked our logo with you, didn't we? I have to remember, what did we trademark?
Yeah, I think it's still in the process. The trademark office is really,
right.
They're really delayed right now, partially because of COVID, but also partly because China, lots of Chinese companies are filing trademarks, like thousands a month. Oh, wow. Because the Chinese government is reimbursing those companies for it. It's a really weird system, and that is throwing the USPTO off significantly. So they are way behind schedule right now.
And Theodore says, thank you for answering his questions.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. All right, awesome. I have more questions that were sent to me, which I really appreciate people sending it. People who couldn't make it, we said that they could just send us questions. This is for Meghan, which I believe you've pretty much answered, but I'll go ahead and ask it again. It's, why do I need to keep records? I don't make that many royalties yet. Which we've kind of covered, but.
Yeah, sure. First of all, it gets you in the habit of doing it when you are making more, but that IRS is what it comes down to. So I'll just kind of use it as an opportunity to explain something further. There's 2 kinds of audits when it comes to tax audits. There's targeted audits, so to speak, and then random audits. And what the IRS will do is, if a company continuously makes money that's not consistent with its industry, that looks like something for the IRS to investigate. So even if you're not making a ton of money, if your tax return looks funny for a relatively long period of time, like a few years, several years, they'll say, wait a second, let's take a look at this. So if the construction industry, let's say you typically net 10% on average, construction industry in general, and your company always takes the loss of 6%, and you have really high repairs and maintenance relative to other folks in your industry, that is a red flag for an audit. So it's just good to substantiate and support whatever you have going on in your financials to keep records of it.
Awesome.
Hey, can I chime in for a second and back up to a different question? I don't share my screen in this app very often, but I'm going to try to share. Okay, can you see that there? This is my law school notes from forever ago in terms of when a work was created and whether or not it's still protected. And as you can see, it's extremely complicated. So I'm just going to say 1928 falls right in here. So if it was published in that time period, and if it was published with notice, and if it was renewal was applied for in the 27th year, then it might be as far as 95 years total of protection, which would mean 1928 plus 95 years. Oh man, Megan's math, she's good at math, right? I don't know if we're still in that window or not, but this is how complicated it gets to prove whether or not it's work copyrighted. Granted, this is my law school notes also, so if anybody is screenshotting this, don't rely on this like legal advice. But this is what I took down in law school when I was learning about copyright. So generally anything created after 78 gets a lot easier because you can just assume it's copyrighted. So, okay, let's see how I stop screen share here.
That I just have to throw in here that just to reinforce to people that you're, way smarter than you think. And I have clients all the time, doctors, attorneys, whoever, that say, just so you know, I'm not good at this stuff. And I'm thinking, no one's good at it because it's law. Like taxes are law. And it's human convention and design and sometimes patchwork. So I just like to support, reinforce the idea that no one really should be good at it or is good at it, in the sense that there's 70,000 pages of tax code. How could you be good at that or have that memorized, So
yeah, that's
I
why
memorized
it's so
it.
important.
I know it.
Only Chris.
No.
That's why it's so important, I think, to have professionals, especially like you guys. You kind of do more of a friendly entrepreneur focus, because a lot of times it is very it's scary to go in front of a lawyer and say, hey, I don't even know what I'm talking about really, but can you help me with, or Megan, you should see my books right now. They are such a mess. I have receipts in a pile. Can you help me, And none of us want to admit our dirty laundry. That's why we don't hire housekeepers that much. It's the same thing. So it's really good. I appreciate both of you taking this time to kind of give us all a little bit of faithless advice, so we can ask our questions that we think are silly and and get some help. And speaking of, we do have a question in chat. This is from Nassau. Can you explain fair use? There are some images I want to use on Wikipedia for educational purposes. Do the images have to be shared with low resolution? I've heard conflicting statements on this.
The low resolution thing I don't think matters. It might matter in the context of trying to show good faith or negotiating your way out of a lawsuit, but it's not like there's anything in the copyright code about low resolution, not that I've seen. The general advice I have is if you find an image on the internet, you should, again, presume that somebody owns it, right? Just because it's in Google Images does not mean that it's free. I had a woman one time that was working for a client of mine that found an image on Google Images and it was actually somebody else's image. The client used it on the blog and they got a letter saying you owe us $1,000. And we talked to the woman and she's like, well, it was on Google Images. It was free. I'm like, no. So anyway, assume it's copyrighted, but you're asking about fair use. And what fair use is a doctrine that says you can use a work that is copyrighted that you otherwise couldn't use if it's for one of these specific purposes. And they're very narrow purposes. Education is certainly one of them, but not everything is actually educational. So if you're like a teacher in a high school and you want to use an image of Dr. Martin Luther King or something, yeah, that's probably fine. I think he's saying that he wants to use it on Wikipedia. I mean, I honestly don't know if Wikipedia is considered educational or not. I mean, I would call it educational. It's a nonprofit, but at the same time, I don't know. Wikipedia certainly is going to have terms of service, so Wikipedia will be protected. If they put an image up on Wikipedia, they'll have what's called a DMCA policy. I mean, I presume they have this, which means the copyright owner can contact Wikipedia and say, I own that image, please take it down. And in following through with these regulations, Wikipedia won't be liable. And your risk is probably relatively low if you're just putting it on Wikipedia. I don't think you would get sued over that. But again, I can't guarantee it, obviously. I mean, if it's copyright infringement, it's infringement. But I think you probably would be safe.
Okay. And I like that you pointed out, just because even if it says it's free use, don't trust that. Because I take a lot of images from Pixabay, which is Creative Commons licensing. And there was one that I had used for something. And then I got a notice that from Pixabay, fortunately, they caught it. But somebody had posted it. It was copyright infringement from an artist. So therefore, anybody who had used it in anything, they had to visually track down, I guess. That would be a nightmare. And then let us know that we were infringing by accident.
Yeah, if you're going to use those free stock photos, I used free stock photos from Wikipedia, or not Wikipedia, Flickr a long time ago. And every time I would do it, I would take a screenshot of the license with the photo next to it so that if anybody ever contacted me, I could say, hey, because the thing is, the author can go in there and change the license all the time and then claim it, right? And so actually it happened to me. A guy reached out to me and said, you're using my photo. I'm like, well, here's my proof that when the time I downloaded it, you were licensing it under a Creative Commons license. By the way, I'm a copyright lawyer, so do you really want to do this? But then I was like, hey, no problem. I'll take the photo down. I replaced the photo. I don't have any interest in upsetting people. But yeah, you're totally right, Angela, that just because it's on a free stock photo website does not mean it's actually free.
That's such a good idea to do a screenshot of the licensing so that you're covered, because you can change things all the time online.
Yeah.
So we actually have a follow-up question or a follow-up comment to that. They said the images are on Wikipedia and they want to use them in a textbook, but they're giving the textbook out for free.
Oh, I see. Oh man, I don't know. The textbook industry is a very for-profit industry, so I don't know. Your absolute safest bet will be to try to track down the author of that photo. And I think Wikipedia usually posts links to the authors. So it would be fairly easy. And if you reach out to the author, you might just say, look, we're giving away a free textbook. Would you mind if we used your image if we give you credit? They might say yes.
You can use all my images if you're giving me credit and passing it out. That's called free advertising. And then Theodore has a comment. Arkham House did renew the copyright. Oh, so we're talking about that earlier work we discussed. Arkham House did renew the copyright in 1961, but I think they were basing renewal on stories' inclusion in a book collection, not when the story was initially published in a magazine the year prior to the book.
Yeah, this just gets really deep, and there's no way I can answer it right now. I'd have to go back even to my own charts and see what the requirements were, because back in those years, there were such strict requirements for how a copyright worked. Nowadays, it's not like that at all. Anything created since, I think, 78 is totally easier than what it was back then. So.
Yeah, I think I've heard the advice. When I first started writing, it was always print a copy and then mail it to yourself, but don't open it because that,
the poor man's copyright.
Yeah.
The only thing that does is it kind of helps you to prove that you actually created it when you did. It doesn't, that's it, which is helpful, but that doesn't create a copyright. But yeah, that's called a poor man's copyright.
That's funny. I never did that, but I always wondered about it. Like, how, that seems so weird.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is for both of you. What are pitfalls that you see small entrepreneurs face the most?
Megan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, this is my classic, and maybe it's just the fiscally conservative accountant in me. But I was just talking about this. I'll go with this one. My classic pitfall that I try to put out there for folks is a lot of times I feel like I have these business owners that come in and they think they have to spend money to make money, or they think they have to jump through a lot of hoops to start making money or get their idea off the ground. And I use myself as an example. I started with, a $300 laptop or a $1,000 laptop with $300 software, and that was it. And I started my tax and accounting practice. And I was in the closet of an office in this building. I haggled my way to a rent I could afford, and my employee and I were in there for too long. And I told people my clients making a lot of money would come in and meet with me. And I just had, low overhead, but I was a mom. I started having babies at the same time I started my business, and I loved them both, and I wasn't going to be deterred. And so I just tell people, if you have something that other folks want, you have entertainment or you have creative content that they want, you have a business, and you don't have to legitimize yourself by doing anything expensive or buying anything expensive. Just put energy into what you're doing, and then, the rest will follow. But that's what I see the biggest pitfall is, like, I got to get this expensive branding and this expensive office and this expensive equipment, and then I'll be a real writer, whatever it is. So. Yeah, I
love that. I mean, I think that's a great, and just kind of as a follow-up to that, if you're too afraid or you don't know how to write a book, write a blog post. If you're too afraid to do a blog post, write a tweet, like break it down to the most simple level so that you can get started. Don't wait. There's never a perfect time to have a business. Granted, I wasn't the woman having the babies, but we also had babies shortly after I started my business, and there's just never a perfect time to do it. Anyway, pitfalls. Let me give two. One's just very general. The general one is don't ignore finance and accounting and legal. I know that they can be scary, and maybe you don't want to call a lawyer or an accountant, but you cannot ignore that stuff. I mean, you might ignore it for a couple of months, but don't ignore it very long, because the headaches later on are much worse than the initial little upfront money to get it started off correctly. Second, more practical or more direct one is copyright issues for creative people. If you're creating the work, great. Just make sure your employer doesn't own it. If you have other people creating it for you, which happens all the time, if you're building an app or a website and you have somebody else build it for you, make sure you know who owns that work. And if you're a writer, or if you're making movies or photography and you have people helping you and you don't get ownership of the copyright, what are you selling? You're selling something owned by somebody else. So do not ignore copyright if you're in a creative industry, which I'm presuming all of you are.
Yeah, good points. Good points. And Nassau says, thank you both for the earlier answers. And yeah, those are really good points. Something that we get with the magazine all the time is our corporate headquarters are here in our house. And I've been told many times, why don't you guys get an office? And I'm thinking, well, the answer is because it's a magazine and it covers itself. It balances itself right now, which is great. And we consider that thrilling. And an office is very expensive. And not only that, but then you have and a lease. You have to have a lease. So you're bound. You have to keep this office for a long time. This is like a relationship now. So
do co-working. Both Megan and I work out of co-working offices. Right now I'm at my house, but I'm going back to co-working in August once my kids go back to school. Way cheaper. It can be month to month.
Right now.
I highly recommend that.
Yes, agree completely. And I think people a lot of times, because they are in that mindset, during COVID, sad to say, but our offices, they almost went all vacant, and it wasn't just people working remote. It was people losing the ability to pay for the rent. But what I see a lot of times, people come in and rent bigger, fancier offices than us, and then they're gone after a couple months. And we were the only people that stayed, which was cool and sad. But I just think you don't need those things to legitimize your business. You serve your clients well, serve them with graciousness, and find out what they want and produce that if that's what is fulfilling to you as a business owner. And that's where the magic of small business happens, So I just agree completely. But take those commitments seriously. If you lease an office, that's a commitment you're making. You typically sign a year contract or whatever. So know that you need to be able to support that. Same thing with if you sign a retainer with an attorney or something, commit to things you can kind of cover, or have a plan, like have some reserves to cover when you're getting into small business if you make that kind of commitment.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of like Voltaire. I think it's Voltaire, so I'm probably wrong. But Voltaire has that quote about live your life like a bourgeois so that your art can be flame. And that kind of reminds me of like this. You can look like a really super wealthy business, very successful, or you can actually be one. But a lot of times they're not the same thing.
Yes. Oh, yes. Couldn't agree more.
So, I will look at my questions here. We have suggestions for success, which I think we've kind of been an ongoing thing. How important is it to set up a solid foundation from the beginning?
Just very. I mean, again, you can get by a little while without it, but it's cheaper if you do it up front. I don't know Megan's fee structure, but like, for example, with me, I can form a single member LLC and get you set up with the state and an EIN for $450, which, is not cheap, but it's also not, crazy expensive. So, do these little things up front and get it set up properly. It might be $1,000, $1,500 in total, which again, I know is a lot of money, but at least then you don't have to come back to it later.
Yeah. I agree. We do something similar where it's like, we'll have a first time CFO session where we cover all of this in detail, and you can ask me any question you want. And that's, with myself, that's $150 CFO session. I send you recap notes and things like that. It's a kind of a twofold answer. It's important to do it, but if you're 2 years down the road, you feel like it's been really messy up to this point, start today and don't be intimidated. It really is like that double answer there. And just go ahead and ask the questions and look for a professional until you feel really comfortable. So it's intimidating to call and ask about taxes, but I have filed tax returns for very sophisticated people who make a lot of money, and they, for whatever reason, did not file for 10 years. So whatever shoes you're in, like, I promise you, there is someone that's got a way crazier, way messier situation. Just take it a step at a time and interview people, interview professionals until you feel a comfort, and then don't be afraid to ask them questions, even if they seem stupid. There truly isn't any such thing when you're talking tax and law. Like, I don't expect anyone to know anything about, so that's what I'd say is just take steps and get started now if you haven't already,
I love that, because I tell people that, like, rich people who, the general perception is they have it all together and stuff, but no, they don't. They make just as many mistakes as the less income people. It's just the difference is when they default on a mortgage, it's like their vacation home or their yacht instead of like their primary residence. But I've been a lawyer for 11 years. I've represented plenty of rich people, and there's plenty of problems there too.
Yeah.
It's not limited to lower income people.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have a question in the chat, and I know we're kind of getting close to time, and I want to make sure that we also share where we can find you with all this good information, like these CFO meetings, which we took, and that was awesome. We have a question in the chat from the Universe Movies. I've just started a side business. It's still in the super beginnings. So far, I'm tracking my income in one spreadsheet and my expenses on another. Is there anything I need to keep track?
Yeah, I'm super happy to hear that you're doing that. That's awesome. A spreadsheet with income, a spreadsheet with expenses. Awesome. All I would say the next step there is to take the income, subtract expenses, is the number positive. If it's positive, put about 25% aside for taxes. That's seriously it. Kudos to you for doing the income expenses. Now see if you're positive. If you are, put some of it aside for taxes. That's like the most important thing you could do right now.
Awesome. Good advice. And how about those in our recent search? This is my question, by the way. In our recent search for banking, we came across Lily Bank, and it automatically pulls money, like 20% out to put in a tax bucket. Would you recommend something like that?
Yeah, Chris, are you familiar? I'm not familiar, but sure, anything that will automate your tax saving process, yes, that sounds good.
Yeah, I'm not an accountant, but I tell my new clients that are setting up companies, the most important thing to do for taxes is to save the money for taxes. Even if you don't pay throughout the year, you might pay a penalty, but at least you have the money. And I say set up 2 bank accounts, one for operating expenses and one specifically to save money for taxes, and put money in there every other week or every month or however often you can. I do know some banks let you have like buckets inside of one account, which could do the same thing. Point is, have money set aside for taxes. I move money into my tax account every other Monday.
Awesome. Yeah,
I do it.
And I just want to explain what happens. Here's what happens. People, like, let's say you're in a different industry, contractor, you start with having a lot of cash flow in and out. What happens is people see this, like maybe they're netting $5,000 a month and they don't know about the tax savings. They think maybe somewhere out there might be a tax implication. Well, you get really used to that standard of living on that $5,000 a month. And then when your tax accountant says you owe $16,000 because you needed to be setting like a third of that aside, it's so painful because your lifestyle is already bumped up to this and you owe that tax bill from the prior year. So you have to bring your lifestyle down plus get that last bill paid. So that's why it's important, Chris saying an operating account and a tax account, that is how imperative it is just to get in the habit of doing it. Regardless of whether or not you hit the quarterlies, get in the habit of putting a little bit aside for taxes. And generally you can do 25%, but it is specific to your situation.
Okay. All right, excellent. And Universe Movie says thank you. And we are almost out of time, so I'm actually going to wrap it up and let you guys just each have a platform for a few minutes to talk about what you offer, where people can find you. I still have some questions, so if you guys ever want to do this again, let me know. I think people are genuinely excited to get this non-scary help.
Awesome.
Non-scary advice.
No quick question, Angela, for anyone we know that's like in this industry, freelance or anything, if we do it again, would it be all right to shoot them the link to participate then?
Oh, sure. You mean to this
yes,
Q&A? Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And I've shared your websites and stuff in chat, which I will do again while you guys are talking and everything. But yeah, definitely anybody who could use this information, which is anybody. Now we know even doctors and lawyers.
Definitely. Chris, go ahead.
Sure. Okay, so I've got Pixel Law. That's my primary business. I represent startups, freelancers, and small businesses. I do pretty much all the day-to-day legal stuff. So forming LLCs, filing trademarks, employment agreements, client agreements, website terms of conditions, things like that. I also have a side business called contractcanvas.com, which is a freelance specific contract platform on the internet where you can go create contracts that are designed for humans and not lawyers, and it's very simple. Anyway, contractcanvas.com and Pixel Law are my 2 places, and you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, all the various places at The Pixel Lawyer.
Awesome.
Oh, and my email address is just chris@pixellaw.com, so feel free to email me. I'm licensed in Missouri and Kansas, which means I can represent clients there. I just moved to Colorado 2 weeks ago, So I'm getting licensed here, I'm in the process. And then on some matters like trademark law, I can help people all over the country. But on more state-specific things, I am limited, unfortunately. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to Angela for inviting me, and I'll let Megan take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, Chris and I kind of parallel each other in these industries. Pretty straightforward. You can find more out about us at hoveecpa.com, HOVEE-CPA.com. My email is Meghan@hoveecpa.com. And our website's kind of in construction right now, but you'll see our general services. We are geared toward the small business owner and kind of helping you periodically. So we operate in CFO sessions, say once a quarter or something, to keep you regular with your accounting and your taxes. And I think, something along those lines. Ooh, I might have lost it. Something Chris said. Specific. I was just going to make a little joke that, and it's not a joke, really, as a CPA, I can help in the various states. Sometimes it might take me a little more due diligence to look up a rule in your state, but we can help across borders. So that's kind of nice. And I do have a few states outside of Kansas and Missouri that I am dealing with frequently. So happy to help people kind of wherever you are. We have a couple CFOs now, myself, and then my other CFO, Michaela, who specializes in kind of the smaller business of just getting started. And so you might talk to either of us depending on what you are looking for. But we really genuinely love serving our small business clients. So thank you so much, Angela.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. On a personal level, you guys have been awesome to help Space and Time kind of comb through all the crazy stuff, because we can put together a magazine, but we don't do taxes. No, I'm sorry. No, we do taxes. We're just not good at it. We don't not do taxes. I did not say that. But thank you guys both so much for being here. I'd love to do it anytime. And this will be a video for anybody who's just catching up that will be on Twitter and YouTube. I'm sorry, not Twitter, YouTube and Twitch and the Space and Time website.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good time.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.